All right.
Welcome in, Clips and Dip, episode 139. We got a live one for you. F it, we'll do it live. F it, it's an obligatory saying now. It's a little bit overused, but hey, Bill O'Reilly made it famous. It's good to be with you guys. I'm Adam Oslin. We got Will Updike here. Who knows? Chuck Mockler may jump in at some point. You never know who might show up. It's a live feed we got going for you on YouTube as we try out all these new platforms and figure out what works as we explore things during this playoff edition of the Clippers here in 2023. Coming off the loss last night by 14 in Phoenix in a game that was much closer than that. We'll talk about, more in depth on what happened in that game. We'll also preview game 3 here for you. And if you guys have questions, I don't know if we'll both be able to see them or if it's just Will since he's the administrator and is in control of the name tags here. Will, how does this work when we do the YouTube live?
We're still figuring it out a little bit. So basically I have, I'll try to keep up with everything on Twitter and YouTube. I got to have a bunch of tabs going on. So bear with us. We're still kind of ironing out some of the kinks of this, but we're excited to chop it up with you. Hopefully some people come in and add some questions, and we'll have a good time.
Well, you're used to having a lot of tabs open anyways. There's usually some computer processing overload at some point.
Oh, yeah.
Nothing like Jeffrey Toobin or anything, but hey, some tabs open. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. I usually have, I think currently on my mobile browser, I have 35 tabs open. And right now on my computer, I'm at a solid 12.
Dear God, you got a processor from Intel that works on like a molecular level or something? I couldn't handle that on my little AMD over here. Okay, so let's talk about it. You guys did a YouTube live last night, you and Chuck came on with me during the middle of that to come on Clippers Talk post game. After their loss, final score 123-109 in game 2, the Clippers get the split. And it's funny, I was thinking about this earlier today. This game last night divides the pessimists and the optimists.
Yeah.
Because there's a couple different ways to look at it. If you're a pessimist, well, you're saying, man, we were up by 13 in that second quarter. We let go of things. And it looked like to me, they had Phoenix on the ropes. To me, and maybe this is revealing who I am more in the glass half full, glass half empty analogy here, but I feel like this Phoenix Suns team, and one of my points coming into the series was they could break at some point if you push them enough, if you get up on them as the underdog, because they've had such severe collapses the last couple of seasons in the playoffs, up 2-0 in the NBA Finals on the Bucks, losing 4 straight. We talked about that. And then, of course, the most miserable Game 7 performance really of all time, especially because they were at home, where they just didn't even show up for that game. And there were reports that came out later whether or not they had COVID. But now they have Kevin Durant, so there's more of a security blanket. But still, I wonder what that does to a squad that's gone through such difficult times the last 2 seasons in the playoffs. And if the Clippers were able to get up 2-0, and I think the most critical point of the game was Clippers up by 13, 5 minutes left in the second quarter, and somehow it ends up tied at 59 at the half. That, to me, is where the game was lost. I hope that's not where the series was lost, because right now, if they do go on to lose this series, that's probably something I'm going to point to. But optimistically speaking, if you are an optimist, I mean, the Clippers were in a game where the Phoenix Suns shot 60% from the field, and outside of Russell Westbrook and Kawhi Leonard, everyone else on the Clippers shot 34%, and they were still right there, down 6 with 3 minutes left.
I mean, I think the other thing to look at optimistically is if you're looking at the long game of it, right? Through 8 quarters of this series, the Clippers have trailed for what, 2 of them? That to me, I think is something that's super encouraging, given that, this is now a best of 5 series. But so far, the Clippers have done a lot to not only stay in games, but to manage to have an advantage more often than not.
And game 3, obviously back in downtown Los Angeles, could cure a little bit of what ails them, because a lot of the talk during playoff time is your stars have to show up on the road and carry you, but at home, your role players can play a more prominent role, can have a little bit more confidence out there with the crowd underneath them. And I think it's going to be pivotal for the Clippers and Clipper Nation to show up in a big way on tomorrow night, Thursday, for game 3, and have some of that enthusiasm we saw during the 2021 run, specifically that game 6 against the Utah Jazz where they were down by 25, there's no way the Clippers come back and win that ball game without them being at home in front of the fans. And I had our engineer there, Jake Warner, Big Brother Jake podcast, Big Brother Jake Warner. He has done games for the LA Kings, for the Lakers during their championship runs. And he said the only time he had ever heard, at the time it was still called Staples Center, louder than that game 6 with the Clippers' 25-point comeback on Utah with Terrence Mann going off for 39 was Kobe's last game. He said that was the only time he had heard it louder than Clipper Nation was for that game 6. So hopefully it's a similar environment tomorrow night.
I mean, I'm hoping if we could get 35% of what the Kings fans have been given that home crowd there in Sacramento. I mean, it's absolutely unreal. It's one of those things that's so inspiring to watch. But I was in Staples Center for that game versus Utah, critical game, and it was unreal. I sometimes tend to be a little bit of a pessimist about like the home court advantage for the Clippers. And that's for a variety of reasons. It's partially due to just kind of how they've performed sometimes in those scenarios. But if there was ever any question about this audience or their commitment or these fans, I think all of those were absolutely quelched that day.
Yeah, I thought they helped carry the team back, and kind of the back and forth players were having with the crowd, the interaction there where Pat Bev would hit a shot, look back to them, Paul George, Terrence Mann, they were just feeding off the energy at Staples Center then. Against this Phoenix Suns team with how good they can be, and we'll get into more of that and just how well they shot numbers-wise in that game too, you need every possible advantage you can get in this series.
Yes, absolutely. And one of those advantages that wasn't there that has been for the Clippers so far, or at least through one game against these Suns, has been the bench and has been the depth of this team, which they've really been able to abuse the Suns. Rotation shortened in that second game. I thought that was a really great adjustment by Monty there to go ahead and limit that time. I think, and I talked about this a little bit last night with Chuck, but Adam, what do you think could be the double-edged sword of that? What are the detriments? Or is this Phoenix team, especially after, coming into these playoffs, they hadn't really played a game of consequence for a couple weeks. They were more or less locked into that 4 seed. There wasn't much higher they could go. And just even without Kevin Durant, the floor was still fairly high for this team. So do you think that we could begin to see, or even in this game 3, see a regression from that extreme efficiency that we saw from the Suns if these minutes loads continue to be that high?
Well, I think that's a great point, because one of the things I brought up last night on the pessimist side was, can Kawhi Leonard continue to perform at this high level for an extended series if he continues to have to do this much on both ends of the floor, offensively and defensively? But the other side of that is, can the Phoenix Suns, who have gotten 90 minutes out of Devin Booker and 90 minutes out of Kevin Durant in the first 2 games, continue to play those guys that much? Devin Booker more likely, I guess, because no, this is not a Kawhi regression thing. How dare you? I'm just wondering. It's a little bit of a red flag that Kawhi is playing. Well, he's averaged 40 minutes so far. And the only reason he didn't get to 40 minutes last night was because they took him out with a minute left, because the game was over. So I don't know why people are considering that, making that into a talking point.
I'm kind of curious your thoughts too, just piggybacking off of that. What do you think, when the game was still in reach there to start the 4th, the decision to not have Kawhi out there? I mean, I'm assuming that was a conscious effort in order to keep that minutes load somewhat lower. Do you think that was the right call?
Well, in retrospect, I don't know what Coach Lue would say about it. He wasn't asked about it last night. But just like to start the second half, it was the Suns on a quick 6-0 run to start that 4th quarter, which is what they did in the 3rd quarter as well. But this was without Kawhi Leonard. I think they were just trying to steal some minutes out there, find a way to get Kawhi a little bit more rest, because in game 1, they took him out during the middle of the 4th quarter. Mm-hmm. So I think the adjustment there was, we're going to play Kawhi, 10 minutes of the 4th, give him a breather to start it, and hopefully we're still within striking distance and we never have to take him out again once he enters the game in the 4th quarter, which I don't mind. Guys just weren't good enough. And as If you look at the way the bench performed in the second quarter and how they actually increased the lead, once again, in both games, they did that in the first half of the Clippers in game one and in game two. But in game two, they were a +5 out there, and they helped get them up double digits. They just couldn't keep that going in the fourth quarter. But I'm sure they looked at that and said, well, they were able to not just, tread water in the second quarter. The bench was able to rise up and steal some minutes while Kawhi was on the bench. He actually didn't come out back in that second quarter until the 6-minute mark. They really gave him an extended amount of time. Normally it would be about the 7 or 8-minute mark. They kept him down till the 6-minute mark. And it was the starters who gave up the lead in that second quarter, which I think was the critical swing of that ball game, because not only do the Phoenix Suns go on a 13-2 run in the last 3 minutes of the second, but Devin Booker hits that three-pointer to end the first half and then comes out in the third quarter, goes 7 of 8, and has 18 points. So he caught fire and found his confidence when it looked like, I really felt like they could have been on the ropes, not just for game two, but the series. Like the Clippers had a chance for a knockout blow, at the end of the first half. They didn't take advantage. Maybe that's oversimplifying things or overreacting, but I think this Phoenix Suns team was right for the picking in the first half of game two, and the Clippers couldn't keep their pedal on the gas or their foot on the gas.
Yeah, totally. And I think that was just a combination of the missed shots. And then I didn't think that we were as physical defensively to start on Phoenix in this one. And I think once they started to kind of see some baskets go, kind of see some easy ones go, at a certain point, it seemed like it didn't matter how toughly contested some of the shots were. It just felt like they were going to fall. And I think that, that's another like glass half empty, half full thing, because I don't know really how you adjust to that defensively, although we will talk about some things that they can do defensively in this game three. But on the other side, like if that, you knew you were going to get that at some point, right? Like you knew that you were going to get the three-headed Hydra at a certain point in this series. And I think that if that was it, right? Like, and I'm not saying that's even the only game that it can that it can happen in, but like, if that was as bad as it got for the Clippers, right? Which it did end up being a 14-point loss. That's not really indicative, I don't think, of like what this game was for the majority of it. I think that's something still to hang your hat on, and I hesitate to say encouraging loss because I don't know that I'd go that far in the playoffs. I don't think there's any such thing as an encouraging loss, but if those three were hitting with the efficiency that they were, and it until the very end, like it's not like this game was completely out of hand, really. I think that bodes pretty well for the Clippers moving forward.
Yeah, the Clippers really just unraveled in the last 3 minutes with those 4 turnovers, with the missed shot in between there, and then it was over after they fought back to bring it to within 6. And there are a lot of encouraging signs, starting with this. The Clippers didn't come out like a team that had a 1-0 lead in the series with the way they played, with that intensity and that urgency. And for all the conversations and storylines we've had all season long with which Clippers team is going to show up each and every night, it's starting to look like they did flip a switch, because the intensity was there for 48 minutes. Maybe they just needed to be in a playoff series, and they knew what they had all along. And our concerns regarding them going in and out of playing hard defensively were a little bit unfounded, because they just knew they had that extra gear in them once they got to the playoffs. Because I was very encouraged by the fact that they were the more desperate team in the first half still. They looked like a team that wasn't satisfied with just winning one game. They were out there competing each and every possession. Doesn't mean you're going to win, but you give yourself a chance to, instead of just being satisfied with getting the split and going home and saying, okay, we're just going to handle home court now and we'll have a 3-1 lead in this series. No, they tried to get game 2. And if they had come back and won that game, I would have considered that a steal. That would have been more of a steal, because they were down double digits in the fourth.
Absolutely.
That's what qualifies as a steal, damn it.
That was my mindset basically going into that fourth. Is like, can the Clippers steal this one? Because this one would, to me, be qualified much more as a steal than that game 1 was. You talked a little bit about like the style of play, and I agree. And I think it's one of those things that's been so encouraging, but also like just further confounding for the rest of the season. Like I do feel like we've been watching two completely different teams. And now part of that is definitely due to a notable absence and everyone defensively kind of having to step up in the absence of Paul George. But at the same time, to me, this is not the Clippers team that we watched for 82 games or however many, combined Kawhi and Paul George games, or however total many Kawhi games even. And I think that it's frustrating because you still got to wonder, like, what was there a different ceiling? Was there a different outcome for this first round? Not that I think that this was the worst matchup on the board, but
at this point, I don't hate it at all, honestly.
Yeah.
When you see what Sacramento has been doing, not just with being up 2-0 on the Golden State Warriors, but they are running them ragged.
Yeah.
They are playing at a breakneck speed that we haven't seen since, you want to talk about 7 seconds or less Suns. This is 5 seconds or less. The way they're getting up and down the court, and you talked about it a lot, that home court advantage we'd see in Sacramento. It's just a deafening sound out there with the way the crowd's on top of you. Every possession has to feel like Game 7. Right now for the Golden State Warriors, or the stakes must feel that high that it's not just a first round series because Sacramento was so desperate for so long just to get back into the playoffs. They're trying to let out all this pent up aggression, all this pent up, nervous energy. And it's finally there for them to enjoy a playoff series with their beloved Sacramento Kings. But
they don't just have it, like they don't just have a seat at the table right now. Like the way it looks, they're damn near the head of the table. And I think that, it could be a very similar thing to get that same sort of crowd reaction back there at Crypto. I mean, you go back to Phoenix and you take care of home court, you come back with both. That crowd at whatever it's called, Walking Arena, or formerly Talking Stick Arena, is looking a lot different to me.
Yeah, and the Clippers never really got rattled in either of the games. You're up 16 in game 1, and the Phoenix Suns had a 9-point lead in the third quarter, and the Clippers came back and won that game. They're down by 12, I think, in the fourth quarter, 12 or 13. They come back, bring it to within 6 with 3 minutes left. They showed a lot of that resilient spirit we saw in 2021. So all the potential and those glimpses of Clippers basketball we saw during the regular season, they're starting to fulfill it a little bit here in the playoffs. You're seeing them put it together more and put together two, for the most part, complete games defensively. Yeah, of course, there are going to be some miscues. There always are. You're not going to play a perfect game out there. But for the most part, they have been locked in, and it took the Phoenix Suns shooting almost 60% from the field, 72% in the mid-range in game 2, and some really tough shots and a great performance by Devin Booker. But to your point earlier of talking about, did they take the Suns' best shot, basically? Is this that one game you get where you just run into a buzzsaw and there's not much you can do about it? I don't think it is. Unfortunately, I had a caller, the first caller last night, Damian in LA, love the guy. But he said, Devin Booker's not getting 38 again. And I quickly heard like a record scratch and was like, oh, I don't know if you know who Devin Booker is, because this is someone who had back-to-back 40-point games in the NBA Finals. He has a 70-point game under his belt. And now he's getting better looks because he's playing next to Kevin Durant. There was a play in that fourth quarter where the double came to KD on the left wing. He got it to CP3, who immediately threw it around the perimeter to the right wing for Devin Booker, who took his man off the dribble. I think it was Norman Powell who was closing out on him. And that's just stuff that opens up because of the gravity of Kevin Durant. He got better looks, and he finished with 38 on 20 shots. Like, he had an extremely efficient game, and it could happen again, or it could be Kevin Durant being the one who gets closer to 40. And it's Devin Booker who has 25. Like, they have the ability to do this. I don't think this is an outlier for the Phoenix Suns.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I wasn't saying that this was their absolute best punch, but I mean, it's like, it's
a big punch.
The ceiling is still higher. Like, the ceiling, I suppose, is still higher, but I meant like on a consistent basis, right? Like, if this is, let's say that they have now, after 10 games, right, with KD, they've now pulled it together enough right? To where this is consistent. I still don't know that that is enough. Just that, like just what we saw last night to beat these Clippers 4 out of 7 times.
Look,
It might be, but I'm not saying like definitively. I don't feel the same way about it as I did coming into this series, I suppose.
I'm more encouraged than I was coming into the series, even though I had the Clippers in 6 coming in. I see the path now, because if they start hitting threes, and they're shooting 34% from 3 so far in this series that split at 1 game apiece, they could have won that game last night. They had open looks. Even though they shot 37%, they only hit 11 of them. And they had some really good opportunities out of double teams and Kawhi passing out of them and finding the open man along with Russell Westbrook. Those shots, I think, start falling when they're back at Crypto.com Arena. I wouldn't be shocked if the Clippers had, 15, 16 threes made in Game 3. They're more than capable of doing that. And all of a sudden, the score could completely swing the other way, where the Clippers are back up by double digits or dominate one of the games at home just because they have a hot shooting night, which they have been due for, where they are overdue for, with guys who have a reputation of hitting those shots that just aren't right now.
Yeah. You talked about the three-point shooting. That's one of those things where I don't feel like we've exploited that on the margins enough. That about does it for our sort of prolonged sort of Game 2 reactions. Let's look ahead here to Game 3. Before we take a little break, I want to take a question here from YouTube. Yas Mayamo, who I hope I'm saying that right, wants to know, can Batum be this cold for this long? Adam, where are you at on this? Does Nico Courtois turn it around when things shift back to Los Angeles?
I think so. I think the safe haven of Crypto.com Arena, it's also just – it's a progression to the mean thing. It's just playing the odds. He's been like this all season long, where he's had a few bad games, then one really hot game. He shot 39% from 3 on the season. But I just haven't seen someone who had been so consistently up and down with the swings and his three-point variance and his shooting variance like we saw this season from Nicholas Batum in a while, especially when you compare it to a couple of years ago, his first season as a Clipper, where it just felt like he was automatic from the outside and would always knock down a big three-pointer for you, at least get you one. And I believe he hit his first 3 of this series and now has missed the last 7. He went 0 for 4 yesterday and had open looks that he can knock down. And he was 1 for 3 in Game 1. So he's 1 for 7 so far. I think he's due for a 4+ made 3-point shooting night. I think Nicholas Batum is due, because if you want to say he's getting older at 34, and some people cited that maybe Batum has lost a step this season, I don't really see that. For the most part, his defense has been there, and that's what keeps him on the floor, even on shooting nights like that. But even if that was the case, shooting's the last thing to go. It's a flick of the wrist. That's not a problem for him. I watch him all the time in shoot-around pregame. He knocks down everything. So whether or not it's mental or it's just a bad rut he's in right now, shooting slump, he's going to find his way out of it, and he has to. I don't think they can win this series because Nicholas Batum is going to be on the floor because he's so versatile defensively. But if he's out there, they can't have these games where Torrey Craig, who I think has had, 39 points so far, an efficient 39 through 2 games combined, where he is the best role player on the floor in 2 games against the Clippers, who have so many guys that can erupt.
All right, so let's look ahead here to Game 3. And we talked about the three-point shooting. We talked about some of these other guys. One guy I want to talk to you a little bit about in particular is Norm Powell, who I think has to be due for a scoring explosion. I mean, we need Norm to be in a different gear than what he's been so far in these playoffs. What do you see so far that's limiting him, and how can the Clippers adjust to get him more shots, to get him going and make him a part of this Game 3?
The one thing that worried me about Norm, as good as he was the last 3 games of the regular season, where he had 20 in all 3 and had a really big performance against the Lakers that was necessary, he had been so consistent when healthy. He was averaging 17 off the bench. That's best in the league. Nobody scoring more points off the bench per game than Norman Powell. But he was 1 for his last 13 from 3, his last couple of games of the regular season. And that seems to have carried over. He was 0 for 3 last night. Him, Norm, Bones Highland, they all went 0 for 11. Everybody's talking about it. And I do think that is an outlier. That's just not something that you can rely on if you're the Phoenix Suns, especially with the type of looks they're getting. But Norm is someone who they need so much, where I had him as, my second key to winning this series behind the Clippers overall as a team collectively, out shooting the Phoenix Suns from 3 to make up for the mid-range masters they have there. Norm, I had him as, if they're going to win the series, he's got to get an efficient 20 per game. I don't even think that's possible anymore because he's only averaging 13 through 2. He'd have to get on a ridiculous heater. I'll settle for 17 a game, though, with his average, what he scored throughout the season. And he ended up shooting, I think 44% from 3 on the year. Or no, he ended up at 40%. But if you look after the first month of November, the numbers are pretty outstanding, the efficiency from Norman Powell. He's got to shoot himself out of this. I think he's one of those guys where you kind of have to live and die with him because he's so important to what they do offensively, and he's so important to helping ease the burden on Kawhi Leonard that, you let him go 1 for 10 or 1 for 15 or 2 for 3 for 15. Like, you let him keep shooting because he's either going to figure it out in this series and find his stroke, or you're going to lose. I don't think there's another way for them to win without Norman Powell waking up here, and I think he will.
Yeah, I mean, he's so key, and his shot profile is just exactly everything that the Clippers need, right? Like, they need to win the volume battle from deep, and they need to get to the line, and he has been absolutely masterful at that. I did like the way that we were able to exploit the free throw attempt advantage a little bit more in Game 2. I hope to see that trend continue in Game 3. You talked a little bit about Bones Highland. Let's talk about Bones. Where are you at with him right now? A little bit of, not a lot of time with the team, to be sure. Not really the most encouraging playoffs performance through 2 games. What is there an adjustment that he can make, how we can use him differently, or is it a situation where maybe he should not be touching the floor or touching the floor less than he has so far?
Well, what's interesting, aside from his offense, he's been pretty good. He's made some good defensive plays so far in this series.
I would agree.
He's also blown by Chris Paul, but he has yet to have an assist, and he's 3 for 13 from the field and made a 3 in Game 1, went 0 for 4 in Game 2. I wonder how much they're chasing a Bones performance because, like we talked about with role players coming into a playoff environment like this, you don't know what to expect. For instance, Torrey Craig seems to be rising up in the moment right now. He's getting open looks. They're leaving him open. He really needs to make those shots, but he is. Some of the Clippers guys aren't right now who are being left open. Bones Highland is one of them, although he takes 3-pointers off the bounce, sometimes right in the face of a defender. He's a different type of shooter like that, but I don't want to say this series is contingent on whether or not Bones Highland finds his stroke like I did with Norman Powell, but we talked about them looking for a Bones Highland game, or Clipper Nation looking for that Bones Highland game. I still think it's going to happen. I don't know if that's what Coach Lue is chasing right now by giving him these minutes, but even though his shooting hasn't been there, his stint in the second quarter in Game 1 was huge when they opened it up to a double-digit lead. His stint in Game 2 in the second quarter, same thing there. He's been on the floor when they've made some runs. So he hasn't been picked on as much as you would expect from the Phoenix Suns. He had the block on Devin Booker at the end of the third in Game 2. That was the only miss he had in the third quarter where he went 7 for 8. It was Bones Highland blocking him. So I like the way he's competing. He, like Russell Westbrook in Game 1, maybe a little bit too amped. You heard from Russ last night on the difference between his shooting performance in Game 1 and Game 2, and he said he just took his time more. Maybe Bones needs to just settle down a little bit, let the game come to him, than just trying to be one shot hot. Like, oh, I know if I get one to go and I'm going to force it even if I have to, just because if I see it go through the hoop, then I know I could get on a heater real quick.
Yeah, and I feel like that's been pretty easy to read when he's on the floor. Like sometimes in his first shift, the first time he's touching the ball, he's putting it up, which you love if it's going down, but it's, maybe not the best option that's on the floor. But I agree, his defensive intensity has been good, and there is always the threat there. And he is just kind of like a different type of player, right? I talked a little bit about before the series, like I think something that could be really impactful for the Clippers is being able to alter sort of some of the styles of play that they have, like to ebb and flow a little bit more, to introduce some unpredictability, especially to a defense that hasn't had a whole lot of time together. We've seen some stints in it. I think that can continue. Speaking of defense, though, I'm curious what you thought about Zoo's performance in game 2. What can we do to make him more of a factor on that end? And, a lot of people are kind of pointing out, and rightfully so, he has been kind of picked on in the drop coverage. Is that something that we need to scrap? Do we need to adjust the way that we're going to defend pick and rolls? Do we need to adjust or, possibly change Zoo's minutes load? What do you see being a difference there for him?
I'm not overreacting to a bad game from Zoo because he is one of the most critical guys on this team that you're not going to win the series without him. He was missed when he went out in 2021 in the Western Conference Finals against the Phoenix Suns. I thought for the most part, people focusing on the value, but he was getting the better of DeAndre Ayton. In game 1, he got the better of DeAndre Ayton. Even though he had 18, Ayton's points weren't that impactful. They were a quiet 18. But in that second quarter, he had 10 points last night, DeAndre Ayton, finished with 14. Some of that stuff you got to live with, though. When he's knocking down mid-range shots because Zoo's playing off of him and giving him that shot to help out on somebody else, you can only defend them and pick your poison so much. If you're loading up on Devin Booker and Kevin Durant, and then CP3 starts hitting the way he did in the fourth quarter and hit a tough shot over Ivica Zubac, then they're probably going to beat us. Although the Clippers still had an opportunity late, and if they were better from the three-point line, a few other guys got hot at the right time or made some open shots, they still could have won that game. So I don't put too much into, Ivica Zubac only had 6 boards. How can you have that as a big man? Well, he's getting pulled away from the rim a lot. That's intentional. The Phoenix Suns are trying to get him away from there. Does he need to be better? Yeah. He was 2 of 7. He's got to play through contact a little bit better. And
he looked to maybe have some of those same nerves. I don't know what was going on there, but he looked a little unsteady offensively out there.
Yeah, and as good as he looked in game 1, I saw the same thing as you there. But you know what? They have to live and die with some of what Ivica Zubac brings because he's too important when he's at his best, and he can punish the Phoenix Suns. I still think they need to feature him more. I don't think 7 shots is enough when you're struggling offensively and everybody else outside of Kawhi and Russell Westbrook is missing shots. Get some easy 2s. Give it to Zubac. One of his 2 makes was against Kevin Durant where they made a concerted effort to get it into him in the post. If KD's on him in the post, go to Big Zoo, and you got a hook shot over him. Punish those guys. Make them pay more. DeAndre Ayton, I don't want to say looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane, and that may be an over or an outdated phrase that you can't even use anymore. I'm not sure. But for as strong as he is, he's not the most physical player. He's still more of a finesse guy, which fits in well with a lot of what the Phoenix Suns do, I guess. Kevin Durant's more finesse. Devin Booker's more finesse. But he's not this, monster. And a lot of people compared him to Greg Oden coming out if he didn't have the knee injuries.
Mm-hmm.
DeAndre Ayton is someone that Zoo can out-muscle at times. And we didn't see it enough yesterday, but some of that is because DeAndre Ayton was hitting jumpers. And if he hits 4 or 5 of them like he did in that second quarter, yeah, you're in trouble, but I'd rather have him hitting those than other guys like Kevin Durant and Devin Booker being in rhythm. Same with Torrey Craig, because those are the guys who are going to be taking shots late in games. Yeah. That's what you worry about. Devin Booker caught a rhythm in the second half in the third quarter, and you never could really turn it off. And he had, I think, 7 more points and big ones in the fourth quarter after having 18 in the third. I'm not as worried about DeAndre Ayton. Zubac, look, he's got to be better. I think he will be. A guy can have a bad game. A guy at the center position can have a bad game in this series. You've talked about it or alluded to it on our last podcast. It stands out more when a big man doesn't go strong. Everybody gets up out of their seat and says, if I was that size, I would be going to the basket at will. I'd be Shaq out there. It's not that easy, or else we'd see more Shaqs in the NBA. it's the nature of playing the position at the center position, especially in the modern NBA, that you get criticized heavily whenever you aren't throwing it down. And Zubats has dealt with a lot of that, I think, over the years. And Carl Tart, brought it up on the last show a little bit. I think that's where some of his criticism comes with Ivica Zubats. He just wants them to play with more force.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Do you think that we see a return to some of the, I'm going to go ahead and generously call them experimental, smaller lineups that we saw in game 2?
I didn't hate it as much as some, only because with the way the Clippers were playing defensively anyways, not getting many stops, you might as well try to lean into an offensive-minded lineup.
Yeah, I could definitely see the vision.
Like, if they could have got something going and unlocked the three-point shooting game that they desperately need to get, to stretch the floor with, that was the lineup to do it. I think it was, Bones, Norm, Terrence Mann, Kawhi was their big. Who was the other guard that was out there? Bones, Norm, Terrence Mann. Was it also, I'm trying to think, Eric Gordon came in for Terrence Mann.
Yeah,
Russell Westbrook. Russ was out there. So, they tried it for a few minutes. It's not like they were getting stops anyways when they did have Ivica Zubats in there. So I think it was worth a shot. And if you're not going to play Robert Covington, if you're not going to play Marcus Morris, I guess you were right. They're going Olive Garden stopper. They're going Olive Garden over Wingstop. Well, you said it.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what we saw all season. And, despite some of the prognostication of Robert Covington in the starters jerseys, in the now infamous Clippers team picture from a practice, I am at the same place that I was when we came into this series regarding Robert Covington and his minutes. And yeah, I guess I'm not really seeing the spot where he fits in the rotation. I think there were some less than encouraging things during the regular season, defensively. And I do think that could change in the playoffs. And I do think that he gives us another versatile, switchable guy. I don't know, man. I'm just not really seeing where he slots in right now and where those minutes come from.
Okay. What if I paint this scenario, give you this hypothetical? Right. Nick Batum in game 3 in the first half goes 0 for 4 from distance. Do you think we see them pull the trigger or break glass and bring in Rocco in case of emergency? Because Nick Batum is just not able to get out of the shooting slump. It's a close game or they're down and he's still not hitting in the first half tomorrow night. Or do you think they go Marcus first?
I still would think that Marcus is ahead of him in the rotation. And I would still think that Marcus is ahead of him in the rotation. If for nothing else, then he might demand a little bit more gravity. It's hard to say. It's hard to say how the defense would react to that, and it would depend too on the number of starters that Phoenix is able to keep on the floor with their bench units. Because if it's some combination of KD and Booker plus the bench, I don't know that that's really the right time. Well, frankly, I don't know that that's really the right time for either of them. I don't know if that's really the get right game that either guy needs.
I'm curious if Marcus comes back in this series, and Coach Lue said before it started he has a role, what he's going to look like just having all this time off. Because he came into the season looking better. He had a couple of dunks. He looked more spry. He wore down as it went along and then had the rib injury. Is there any thought to the fact that Marcus just needed to get healthy and that was playing a role in his poor shooting performances and lack of lateral movement out there the last 3 months to you?
Look, I mean, the way this Clippers team deals with injuries and talks about injuries, anything is possible. I think that could certainly be a factor. We see quiet sort of minutes restrictions on guys. We see guys just performing really poorly despite playing a lot of minutes. And it just seems like they're still kind of being run with. And then, lo and behold, out of nowhere, they'll show up on the injury report and then come back and look better. So it's definitely possible. I would think, well, I don't know, on one hand, maybe the fact that neither of them have appeared doesn't mean that there's any sort of lack of confidence in either player. It could just be, Ty Lue not wanting to overreact to a situation, right? Because I think that there is a pretty clear pathway in game 2 when that double-digit lead kind of started to get extended. And even though it felt like we were really in it, I do think for a younger coach or even a more reactionary coach, it would have been feasible and understandable to go with a guy who hasn't played a lot of minutes with this unit, right? Just hoping for something, just rubbing 2 dimes together to try to make $1 out there.
Yeah, and they're not in a position right now where they need to, make any desperate moves to just try something else because they're down 0-2 and Phoenix won by double digits in both the first 2 games. They're in a really good spot. It's encouraging overall where the Clippers are. And I think it was especially telling that they went after game 2 like they had lost game 1. That was the level of effort, urgency, and intensity out there. And all season long, we've been saying, where is the urgency? It's showing up now in the playoffs. But
yeah,
I don't know what that means for Coach Lue and what lever he would pull if Nicholas Batum continues to slump with his offense. Now, if some of the other guys start to step up, some of the other role players, like Norman Powell we mentioned, even someone like Terrence Mann takes more shots, or Bones Highland catches fire, then you can live with Nicholas Batum still not hitting shots because his defense and everything else he brings is so big. That's another way that the Clippers can remedy this situation with the 4 position and guys just not hitting shots out of that right now with Nicholas Batum. Somebody else could pick him up.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit, but your boy Greg wants to know, do you guys think that being on home court base, that alone will help the role players step up big time?
I think so. It's typical in a playoff series that role players just settle in better at home for whatever reason. Superstars are paid the big bucks for a reason. When you see a guy have a performance like, okay, Nicholas Batum as an example, he had that 30-point second half. I think it was against the Indiana Pacers, was it last season, where he just exploded for a 30-point second half. Or you see like a Tony Delk 50-point performance against his former team, the Sacramento Kings. These outlier, Tracy Murray goes for 50 with the Washington Wizards. Great college player, wasn't a great NBA player, but these guys that show up and have a 50-point game out of nowhere. Corey Brewer's another one. Sometimes the difference between role players and superstars or stars and all-stars is just a matter of consistency. It's not that they can't do
That's
it.
A great
it's
call.
How often can you do it?
That's a
how
great call.
often can you repeat that performance? So these role players at home, they're going to get a lift from the fans there. And just getting away from that hoop, I think, in Phoenix for somebody like Batum or Norman Powell, just like coming into a series with a clean slate, it's okay. Game 3, you know what happened in Phoenix, maybe that stays there, but I have a chance to figure things out, get into a rhythm now. We're tied up at 1-1. There's a lot of positive feelings. Coach Lue talked about the confidence last night and how confident the team still is, even after losing that game. And I would expect them to be. The Phoenix Suns aren't looking like a juggernaut right now. They're not looking like a team they should necessarily be scared of. The Clippers, if anything, look like the team that, they could be as dangerous as we thought they were going to be coming into the season. If they get Paul George back, I think a lot of people have already changed their pick that if they had Paul George, they're winning this series. Like, it's that simple.
Well, I think this is a perfect time to get into the $42 million question. Paul George, we did see some new practice video yesterday. Him running around. He looks like he has a heart rate monitor or something on. Has your opinion changed? I don't actually remember your original opinion. I'm sure you probably said Paul George would be back game 2, but has your opinion changed on Paul George returning to this series? And if so, when do you think that could happen?
I was optimistic coming into the series, even with the reports that were out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought he could return mid-series, but then we saw him doing the stationary shoot around. It's a little bit of a negative because he's not doing any explosive movements. How much can you really take away from that? But the fact that less than a week later, we see him doing movement drills and running up and down and trying to get his wind back and do some cardio, I think that's significant.
I would agree.
I'm not saying he's going to be back tomorrow night. I don't think that. But I wouldn't be shocked if he was back Tuesday for game 5 after they get those 2 days off between game 4 and 5, where they finally get 2 days off between games in the series. That wouldn't shock me.
I think that's a great point. And if he is to return this series, which I had kind of previously completely ruled out, just going off the reports of what we had been told, what we've been seeing, up until that more recent report of him actually running around and like trying to get his cardio back to the level that it needs to be at for him to play meaningful minutes. I think that game 5 would be the perfect time for him to return. Almost not completely, but almost regardless of what happens at home, I think that it would be the perfect time. I think even if the Clippers somehow ended up on the wrong end of a 3-1 split, if he's good to go for that game 5, why not?
That would be at about the 5-week mark if he came back for game 5, I think.
4-week mark.
I thought that was this week. I thought it had been a month this week.
I thought it was the 31st, but I could be wrong.
Okay. I'm just saying, a lot of people are agreeing. 51% chance, including Chuck Mockler, that Paul George returns. I think it could be better than that. Because if it's not, and we don't know this for sure, but if it's not just about his flexibility, his comfort level, his pain tolerance, and we're just talking about conditioning and his lungs, and then PG's in business. Then a week after seeing that video, I don't think it's out, too far out there, too crazy of a call to say a week after what we saw yesterday, he could be back for a ball game, especially if a series is tied up at 2-2 and it's the pivotal game 5, the most crucial game of the series.
Yeah, and I'm not a doctor, to just in case anyone was unclear on that. But,
you want to change your name tag to that, or
just seeing that it was more about his cardio ability. I do think that was super encouraging.
Yeah, and the shots were obviously falling. He looks great there. I mean, this is somebody who, and a lot of people have referenced this, when Paul George has come back from injuries as a Clipper, he comes back and hits the ground running. He drops 30. That's what we have seen whenever he has returned, going back to him off the shoulder injury.
Yeah, which was Minnesota, right? Or was that the second game back?
I think remember. It was New Orleans, the Pelicans, and they lost, but maybe he had 37. And then he had the big game against Atlanta where they put up 150 points or something like that. You may be right, though.
I'm thinking of the Minnesota game, and maybe it wasn't. I don't think it was his first game back, but it was the first game that he and Kawhi both
the 40-pointers.
Yeah.
Where it was NBA Jam. It was like he and Kawhi versus, I think, D'Lo and Karl Anthony Towns. It was a weird 2-on-2 type of game going on.
So we talked a little bit about our hypothetical star. Let's talk about our actual star, Kawhi Leonard. I know Adam is certain that he's going to regress, but as Kawhi, continues to see more aggressive doubles, we've talked a little bit about, how the role players and stuff can step up. What can Kawhi do to keep this going? What can Kawhi do to continue to, in my opinion, through 2 games, still has established himself as the best player in the series?
Oh, he's the best player. When he ripped it from KD and went the other way.
Oh, my God.
I thought there was no way. Granted, I had the radio feed obviously ahead of television. Radio's live, people. At AM 570 LA Sports with the Patriot, AM 1150.
Much like this show, if you're watching on YouTube or Twitter.
Good call. So I knew it was coming, but when I saw the play that was lagging behind on the television, and I was watching it on Bally, get Brian Seaman and Mike Fratello in there. But I couldn't believe when he took the ball away. I was like, he's going to take this coast to coast and dunk it. Where they had 2 guys back, including Kevin Durant, right next to him, and he went by him and just was more physical. The thing that makes Kawhi, I think, so great in playoff settings is he embraces the physicality more than other guys because he's so strong. And one of the reasons I think he's better than Kevin Durant in those situations is because KD's more of a finesse player.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
more,
completely different physicalities. Like just completely, I mean, completely different builds, completely different styles. But I agree with you in that offensively, KD, great, like, great for the postseason, like so great for the postseason, obviously. But Kawhi, I feel like there's a little bit less of a variance because of the style that he plays, right? It's so much more coming from that physical ability, that stamina, and that sort of like constant workhorseness that I think can kind of save you if we do get a performance from Kawhi that's less than ideal offensively, right? I think that his floor is a little bit higher just because of what he's able to do and how he can control the game purely with physicality. Like he's not as dependent, not that he doesn't have it or anything, but he's not like as dependent on the touch as a more finesse player.
It may be because Kawhi isn't the quickest guy on the floor. He's not the most athletic guy on the floor. So when he takes shots, defenders are often right there. So it may have conditioned him over time to be more comfortable with contact because guys are there. It doesn't matter if they have a hand in his face. He's more used to that than other players. And even someone like Kevin Durant, who may not be the quickest, he's quick for his size, but his thing is just rising over the top of you and getting clean looks.
At any time.
Kawhi's not getting the same clean looks, but he's still hitting at a ridiculous rate. He embraces the contact. But you mentioned the passing out of the double teams. Kawhi had 6 of his 7 assists last night in the first half. And that goes to the point of guys weren't hitting shots in the second half. But after the first quarter was the first quarter of the first half where the Clippers were 6 of 13 from the field. That was the first quarter. 6 of 13 from the field in the first quarter. They went 5 for 17 from three. Excuse me, not from the field, from three in the second half. After going 6 for 13 in the first quarter from distance, 5 of 17 the rest of the way.
Huge drop off in those 3-point attempts. Like just huge.
Yeah, they took 20 in the first half. It looked like there was going to be a guarantee they'd get up at least 35, and where'd they end up at 30?
Yeah.
So
30, maybe 31, but yeah, right around there.
And I understand because you're not hitting them. Maybe you're more reluctant to take them. But like you got to live and die with Norman Powell, I think, in this series. He has to get going or else you're going to lose. You have to get going overall as a team from three, so shoot your way out of it. Keep putting them up. Keep taking those shots. It's the only way to equalize things with the rate of mid-range shots being hit by the Phoenix Suns. And they have – I heard this earlier. I forget which podcast. We'll just say it was the Lob the Jam. I'm going to give those guys credit. It may have been Dr. Shapp. I heard this earlier, or maybe it was Lucas Hand, our boss, better to point him out, that the Suns have attempted only 20 shots in the restricted area in the series so far, and they've attempted 100 shots in the mid-range, which I think is considered 10 to 16 feet out. That's wild.
Yeah, no, absolutely unreal. And I mean, that definitely has led to the free throw disparity. It's one of those keys that we talked about coming into this series. At the line is a place where we can punish Phoenix because we are getting to the restricted area more so than that team. I don't want to backtrack too far a little bit, but we talked about Kawhi's physicality. Ex-Mongo Project wants to know, will we see CP bump Kawhi again? I'm curious, what was your read on that? What are your thoughts on that? How does the Claw respond?
I don't know if he was even aware he was bumped. Like, he barely moved. Like, It's Kawhi Leonard. He's the Rock. He's made of stone or metal or whatever you want to say. Like, that was hilarious to watch. People were saying like, oh, he didn't get his programming chip yet for being bumped post game because he just didn't react to it at all. Chris Paul did a little bit, but he also tried to act like, oh, no big deal, nothing happened there. And Kawhi just kept walking. Like, I do, though, in all honesty, I think they both felt it. They both knew there was, a little bit of a rivalry relationship there with the way they walked by each other, that no guy wanted to submit to the other or show that, oh, they got put off balance by that bump.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, you get hit in baseball and you're not supposed to rub it. And when you go to first base, if you get hit by the ball, like, oh, don't show them that it hurt. Don't show them that it hurt. Don't rub the injury. You don't want to look weak out there. And Kawhi never does.
All right. So before we get out of here, Adam, what's your prediction? Game 3. What do you got?
I got the Clippers winning game 3, and it may be, I think one of the games back at home, game 3 or 4, more likely game 3, they could win by double digits. It's possible that they could win in a more comfortable fashion than what we saw in game 1. A game they were leading.
I'm right there with you. I think the Clippers are due for, a bounce back to the means from some of these other guys, as good as everyone was in game 1. I think that in some of those, in the minutes where they don't have 3 out of 4, let's say, of their key guys, the Clippers are due for like an absolute surge. We've seen it. We've seen this team in just short little stints. I'm thinking of the third Lakers game, the one before the last one, where there was like a 90-second stretch where they went on like a 7-0 run. And it was just, like this team is capable of so much in such a short amount of time that I would be very surprised if one of these 2 games, things didn't go a little bit our way and things got, for us offensively, a little bit easier than they have been through these first 2 games.
They just match up a lot better even than I could have thought against the Phoenix Suns. That Kings potential 3-6 matchup looks like death now compared to them going up against the Phoenix Suns. Some of it's biased because they won a game, but I think even if they beat the Kings in a first-round series, they would be so incredibly worn out that they would have nothing left the rest of the playoffs. That would be such a difficult task. At least the Phoenix Suns play in the same range and the same pace and tempo as the Clippers. They're not going to get run off the floor. There aren't a lot of guys with Cam Payne out, especially right now, that can just kill you off the dribble. Devin Booker can do it some. We saw it last night, but it's an easier team to defend for the Clippers personnel. And I think if the defense plays the same way and they don't have a let up just because they're back home and they know they're getting some home cooking or they're going to get some of those shots to drop, but they continue to play with that defensive mindset for 48 minutes and stay locked into the game plan, they got a great chance to win game 3. That's typically, it's just eyeball test. I don't know what the numbers say, but when a series is tied up at 1 game apiece, and that third game going back home, usually in a close series, which we think this is going to be, that home team has a big advantage at game 3 of a series tied up at 1 game apiece.
Yeah, definitely. Who is your surprise performer of the night?
Ooh. People are saying Carl Tart got his zoo game, by the way, in game 2. Like he picked him for a surprise bad performer or something like that. And he was right, I guess.
He's not religious, but he is preying on Zoo's downfall.
I'll go with Nick Batum. 4 3-pointers made at least. He starts to knock them down. Just being back on the home floor, it can do wonders for a guy. Change the scenery, coming back from Phoenix. What's the old phrase from Bull Durham? Clear the mechanism?
Yeah.
That's what he's got to do. Who do you got?
I'm going Norman Powell, and I think he's going to have a big game. I think it's 20 plus, and I'm going to say he gets like 8 free throw attempts.
Okay. And that could be big for a lot of these guys struggling. And that is one of the, if you're looking through the lens of the pessimist, the Clippers in that game yesterday ended up getting up, 17 more free throw attempts. It was 31-14.
Yep.
That kept them in it. That was a big part of it. You brought it up post game on the live. I listened to it. That kept them hanging around. I don't know if you're going to see a disparity like that in game 3. And even though it makes sense, the Suns are taking a ton of jumpers. It's not that the Clippers got some great whistle. I thought Batum got a really tough call on him. Eric Gordon had a couple go against him. They weren't benefiting necessarily from Scott Foster or anything like that. No. But this has to continue. That's another trend that just has to continue with them getting up more free throws.
Yes. All right. Well, I think that'll do it. Thank you, everybody who joined us for this one live. You can catch us on YouTube. That's at Clippers Podcast. We are on Twitter, where this is also streaming live. That's at Clippers Pod. listen to the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. Adam, anything else you want to leave these fine folks with before we get out of here and get our preparations in for Game 3?
You call that a bump? You call that a knife? That's not a knife. I'll say this. I'll put this up on the podcast as well. I'll rip it and we'll have it on Spotify. We'll have it on iTunes. So you could be listening to it there right now, even if you'd missed us live. So it'll be good. So it's another little avenue for us to put up new content with these YouTube lives. Look for them.
Yep. Yeah. We're trying to find different ways that we can bring you guys all the Clippers news that you want. Hopefully you like it. If you do, like, comment, review us over on iTunes or Spotify. And yeah, thank you so much. Let's go Clips. Game 3 win. Let's do this.